Jai Guru, everyone.
Yeah, good.
Hi, Guru. And welcome to another chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi. We are on chapter 12 still and on part 15. And today we have Chris and Kian and Priyank and myself. Are we feeling ready for the episode today?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay. But before we jump on in, for anyone that may need a little reminder about what we talked about last week, Chris, could you take it away?
Sure. So in the last part, there was the curious case of Kumar, a new devotee that entered into the hermitage of Sri Yukteswar. And he had a particular favor with Sri Yukteswar that hadn't been really observed before. It was quite peculiar to, well, Mukunda, presume everybody else in the hermitage. That led to some clashes between Mukunda and this newcomer, Kumar. Kumar was given a position in the hermitage that was one of leadership, but sort of fell short from the mark. And there were lots of lessons in there. There was a bit of a fall from glory, very unfortunate situation where he rejected the guru's protection. The lessons really there for us all. There's ones in humility, the environment, and will, as well as I mentioned, the guru's protection. So there's lots of great information in there to delve into. So if you haven't listened to it, yeah, we encourage you to do so.
I feel like chapter 12 is just full of lessons, isn't it? Full of things to dive in. And in this one, we've got Sri Yukteswar and his approach to people as souls instead of, recognizing man or woman. He embraces all as the same. And he also talks a lot about sex and his approach to that, and also his counsel about what we should be doing in our lives and how he instructed his devotees. So it's a really great insight into the mind of Sri Yukteswar. So then we'll begin. So Guruji starts off this section saying that Sri Yukteswar mixed freely with men and women disciples, and he treated all as his children. And I love that line because it reminded me of God. God treats us all as his own, right? And regardless of, our gender or, what we have done, he loves us as his children. So I thought it was a lovely reflection on God's love.
Not all religious paths in India have free mixing, from the Swami to all the members of the ashram. There's usually heavy segregation between men and women. Obviously not all, but that's usually the case. So this is why Guruji's made this point here, which you may not know.
Yeah, for me as well, it's being seen how you want to be, so that we want to be seen as souls rather than looked at as immortal. And Sri Yukteswar, looking at everyone that way, helps to, well, that's the role of a guru, dispelling darkness with light. So yeah, I think for me that it helps bring us in and concentrate on our immortal nature.
Yeah, there might be better people here to speak on this subject in a broader sense than I myself. But in a broader sense, the separation or partition of men and women in the yogic culture, I believe, is due to the practices and then the impacts on the two forms that actually do subtly differ. So if you're in a temple, you're performing certain rituals, the energetic structure is different, and that should be observed. But obviously we're talking solely here about the guru mixing with men and women, and that's a whole different subject. But in a broader sense, like this separation, there is actual meaning and purpose to it. So we shouldn't sort of throw the subject in altogether. It can be separated out to show that there is purpose to it at times.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why in Guruji's ashrams, they have the monks and nuns have their own courses, because I went to a boys' school and I also went to a mixed, and the boys' environment, there's a certain freedom to it, but then you have to behave when the girls come. So, no, but I think there's a reason just naturally. Sometimes we want to be with the same, gender or otherwise. But with Sri Yukteswar, not just making no difference, I think it helps remind us of our divine nature.
And going back to what you were saying, Prank, it perhaps would have been quite radical at that time for someone to have mixed so freely, who was a Swami. But again, it just shows what level of consciousness that Sri Yukteswar is on. He can mix freely and not be even touched by temptation or anything like that, because he's fully in communion with God and he's transcended that consciousness.
It's one of the reasons is because modern Swamis aren't necessarily realized masters, so they still get affected by Maya and sexual compulsions, which I know we're going to talk about a bit later in this episode. But I've been to many satsangs, for example, where there is separation, but it's really impractical. For example, if there's a satsang full of 2,000 people, they would be one big hall. The ladies would be on the right, and the men would be on the left, or vice versa. And the Swami addressing the audience would face the gentleman, so that he doesn't look to the ladies. So it depends how conservative the organization is, but that's the kind of thing you get. But we kind of a little bit we have that here. For example, if we're liaising with monks in SRF, it's there's these hidden rules. For example, we shouldn't, if you're a woman, then you should try not to be alone with the monks, and vice versa for men, I imagine, although haven't experienced nuns coming to the London Centre yet, although we do have them coming next month, so we'll see how different that is, because I'm quite excited to just see how the energy of the whole place is with the female monastics, as opposed to men, which we've always had for the last 10-15 years. So there's lots of considerations even in SRF with this kind of thing, but obviously Swami Sri Yukteswar is beyond that, as you said, Lauren.
Yeah, and Lauren, in terms of radicalism, it makes me think of that passage, I think it might be a bit later in the book, where there's a woman who wants to be a disciple of a certain master, and he refuses to take her initially because she's a woman. And then she says something to the effect of, aren't we all female, before the Lord? And then he's at her feet.
Yeah. Another reminder. And, even, Sri Yukteswar, it says here that, he makes no distinction. He doesn't show any partiality towards anybody because he sees them as souls, right? And how beautiful to be in that state of consciousness where, that is, so clear, right? You're living in truth. And he goes on to say, when we're asleep, we don't know if we're a man or a woman either. We are consciousness, right? And he says, just as a man impersonating a woman does not become one, so the soul impersonating both man and woman remains changeless. The soul is the immutable, unqualified image of God. It's quite powerful. I feel like, he's really trying to, get the point across that we are soul. That's what we are, and we should remember that, be beyond the form. We are the image of God, and that doesn't change. Yeah,
it's very comforting to me. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about how the soul's untouchable and can't be burnt and is ever joyous. So if there are any problems, just concentrate on that. And then yeah, I think it brings out that nature as well, because if we place our attention or consciousness on that truth, and then we feel it, and then it helps us to realize that that is our nature.
Yeah, and obviously there's some, especially in today's climate, there's some people that belong to the LGBTQ plus category. They may like read more into this than I think what is meant here, because Guruji and in the lessons and all the writings, he really emphasizes that, you know, the soul has no gender, right? The soul is pure. It's only when we're born we enter into this whole delusion space, and we identify with whatever we identify as, but the soul is spirit, and that's the emphasis in the teachings, isn't it? And yeah, it's something that's going to be played out later in this section that we're going to discuss as well.
Guruji actually talks more about the spirit and the soul. There's a really lovely quote from him. Priyank, would you mind reading it out, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
The
you.
spirit is ever existing, ever conscious, ever new, omnipresent joy. The soul is individualized reflection of ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy, confined within the body of each and every being.
Wow.
Where is that quote from?
Do you know, Kian, I haven't written here. I normally, on the cards, I always write where it's from and the page number, and that's the only one I haven't. I think it's from the website. I think it's either on there or it's in the Divine Romance.
Okay, thank you.
I can find out for you. Gosh, Kian's really highlighted my lack of preparation here. That's okay.
No, oftentimes we can come across wonderful quotes and then it's not written down, but that's not the point, you know, of the reference. Yeah.
But it's good to know where it's from, I think, and it's good to, you know the source. So thank you for that lesson, Kian. Thank you.
We'll find the link and we'll put it on. I think it's from that website.
Yeah. I think it's from yogananda.com.
Yeah, the source is spirit.
Yes, thank you, Kian. And there was something I came across in the Divine Romance, and it's not directly linked to what's being said here, but I feel like it kind of helps us along the way, because you know it's all well and good saying, oh yes, well, we're the soul and we're not gonna, you know, treat people as male or female, but you know, we do have those tendencies, or you know, because we are human, right? And I was reading about love and friendship and what we've come on earth to learn, what Guruji was saying, and there was this beautiful section in the Divine Romance. Kian, would you like to read it out, please?
Yes. Sorry, no, pulling it up.
I can read it out.
Yeah.
But
okay,
if the love you feel in your heart is not of this earth, not worldly, if you have achieved love for all on a basis of divine friendship and not carnal attraction, if you love others for themselves and not for selfish ends, you have attained and expressed God's divine love. To develop pure and unconditional love between husband and wife, parent and child, friend and friend, self and all, is the lesson we have come on earth to learn. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. And then going on in the chapter, Sri Yukteswar starts to talk about women, and this is where it gets quite, again, radical for the time. And it says that, you know, he never blamed women for man's downfall. And I remember feeling quite like, yeah, when I read that, because, you know, so often in life, you know, women have been blamed for that.
Where has that been, just out of interest? Have you, like, what type of places have you heard that, or like in what ways?
Well, I mean, this is just my personal interpretation of things. So I don't want to speak as if I'm coming from a place of truth. And I certainly don't want to offend any other religions because they're all beautiful and have their own power and truth. But I think it mainly stemmed from, for me, the kind of Adam and Eve concept of, and that thing. And, across even Buddhist texts as well, there's things about women in there, and it seems to be a kind of subtle general theme. So it was quite nice to read this, and for Sri Yukteswar to say, well, actually, women are tempted from the opposite sex as well. It's not just men, and I think that's quite powerful as well. At the time, but also bringing that into now as well.
But have you experienced it, Lauren?
Personally,
No one saying women are the blame, women like you.
of man's downfall.
Yeah.
No one's ever said that to me personally, no. Thankfully.
Yeah, it's something that is maybe quite primitive in us to maybe look to the external gross world and blame it for how we feel and not actually take responsibility for that. In the yogic teachings that we, fortunately follow, we have to look internally if you want to change the world, to change yourself internally. And so you don't try to go around controlling everything else externally. You do the work internally. So if you've got that lust and desire and things going on inside, that's because you have that, or you have anger, that's because you have that. That's not to do with the external world. So we're moving into this age, the Dwapara Yuga. It's my favorite subject to talk about the yugas, but hopefully we see that less and less. But certainly, yeah, it's still in the world. But here we have 100 years ago, Guruji laying it out plain and simple. Sri Yukteswar had followed this, so ahead of their time.
Yeah, and it lays out for me as well the difference between a fully realized master and, I don't want to say a regular saint, but someone who's maybe achieved sainthood but hasn't quite got all the way. Because on the one hand, I think it might be in this chapter where there's Guruji talks about the great saint who blames women for the downfall of mankind, but Sri Yukteswar said it must have something to do with early in his childhood, so he wasn't quite free of delusion, but one who can see clearly this type of delusion doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's in this section here, yeah. Because Guruji apparently asked, why did this saint call women the door to hell? And he said exactly that. Yeah, he must have had a troublesome experience in his childhood, which I find interesting because it's there is a saint, right, who is acting in one way, but in some ways sort of like spirituality has kind of masked his actual problem, which is more earthly, right, and more to do with like the subconscious beliefs now that he has about women due to something he's had in his past. So yeah, I feel like it's also a good reminder for us to kind of watch out for those things, and make sure that we are actually, we may think that we have, let go of a certain thing or whatever that is, but actually, like, is it really that, or is there something else going on? So yeah, it's quite interesting in that way. And then it said, otherwise he would have denounced not woman, but some imperfection in his own self-control. So then again, it's like, go inward, look at yourself before you point the finger out.
Right. Yeah. When Guruji uses great saints here, for me, I think maybe it's because it's so prominent in the teachings, is talking about if there's a problem, look to yourself and remove it. It's a graft on the soul. And so if someone were referred to as a saint, and then I heard them talking like that, it's like, I'm like, well, hang on a minute, why are they blaming someone else for for everyone's problems, not just their own? So it also highlights the depth and the purity of Guruji's teachings. That this is such a prominent theme.
Yeah. And also, you know, Guruji really gave us the toolkit and the lessons from him for every aspect of life, you know. And you know, he talks about temptation in the Gita as well, and you know what happens when we start striving. Chris, would you like to read that out?
Sure. Every man sometimes experiences a peculiar state. Even as he strives towards virtuous action, he seems to be dragged into temptation, almost by force. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 36.
Yeah.
I think we've all felt this force one way or another, right? Like, you know, we all resist, and, you know, the best way is not to actually engage, in a sense, like really sort of try to fight it on your own, because that's the ego that thinks it can overcome, but it's to turn to God, to look to God, to, you know, tie yourself the tether and hold on tight, and just get taken to a better place. But like I said, Lauren, it's within the individual, but people can feel this in so many different ways, whether it be relationship, food, or, you know, alcohol, whatever the vice. There's a definite force there, and the ego is not to be allowed to engage on its own.
So what do you say, Chris, to your friend who says, I need to get out of my system?
Yeah. You know, somebody said this to me recently, that you should follow desires with your full force, and sort of that's
What?
I kind of scratched my head and thought, well,
Are they great saints?
Well, yeah, thinking, how do you differentiate between one negative desire and one seemingly good one? But I don't know. Yeah, it's a curious one, isn't it, Priyank? No comment.
You don't answer the question. What are you going to say to me if I say, Chris, I just need to get out of my system?
Depends what is it, chocolate, Priyank? Is that
No, we're talking about sex.
I'll
We're
help you.
talking about sex here, right? We're talking about women,
Oh,
obviously.
Meditate. Direct the energy inward into the ocean.
Just as I said before, like
What if I didn't have the teachings, Kian?
Exercise strenuously or intense mental concentration.
What Guruji says essentially is that, you know, these pursuits always lead to disgust or distasteful positions. You know, it's a hollow pursuit, and I think everybody can relate to that. And so, if you want to make that question, sort of bring it down to earth, it's try to make it relatable to that person. So, is there something you've done that you've later regretted? Well, imagine that times infinity. You know, if you pursue it with all your might, you know, you've eaten too many chocolate bars one night, you're going to wake up feeling rubbish. It's like, do you want that feeling? It's quite a practical way to think about it, I suppose. Everybody can relate to, whether you're a small child or fully grown adult.
Yeah, and there's the advice about avoiding one thing or trying something else, but also discrimination, and that if we want to learn by experience, then we can do that, and then compare the results.
What would you say, Priyank?
You're going to ask that question.
That's a good question.
Uno reverse.
I would go back to the very core principles of like, what are you looking for in life? Like, start from there, and hopefully they just say, you know, happiness, and then you just draw that conversation out, and like what's going to bring you happiness, and how do you become happy? How do you become not upset? How do you get control of your life and all, and then go down that line and then make them, well, that is what I usually do, make them understand it philosophically, and then bring in meditation, how it can help you do that, how, you know, the Kriya technique we're going to obviously discuss, like, draws the energy inwards and away from those sense attractions, and allows you to be more happy and all that good stuff.
Frank, you said usually do. Is this like a regular conversation for you?
This is a common philosophical, especially at university, very common debate we used to have.
Oh, really? Oh, very interesting.
With all manner of people from atheists and theists.
Nice.
Did you ever have anyone that was of the opposite view who then started to come round to what you were saying?
Oh yeah, often. But
Hmm.
then you also had the people that just carried on pursuing it.
Yeah.
And went down into Maya.
Well, Maya's very
No,
strong.
Maya.
Yeah.
M-I-R-E.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought he was like, yeah, go down to the Maya. I mean,
Maybe that's similar for a reason.
No.
yeah, right. But I mean, Maya, M-A-Y-A, is very strong, right? So it's no surprise, actually, in a lot of ways that people are so kind of tempted by it and drawn back, dragged into temptation almost by force, and I've seen this in my own life with other things. If you say, oh yeah, I'm going to sit down and meditate tonight and I'm going to meditate for a long time, suddenly I find myself utterly restless because you put the intention out and it's like Maya goes, ooh,
Walk right.
really? Shall we test that one? So it's always trying to bring you back, but that's the battleground we're on, isn't it?
Yeah. Just to sort of add an extra layer to what Priyank was asking, like if a devotee was to ask that question, the answer is probably quite different, and probably slightly easier, you would hope. But Guruji is our direct line to God. He is our guru that we've accepted, and so whilst God, we might not hear God's answer, so to speak, we do have Guruji's teachings, and that is as good as God's word to us. So, Guruji, he would give us ways to get around that. But one way to think about it is to put your attention and concentration on Guruji. And then actually a lot of, these difficulties, these forces get dissipated. They, they're not so hot on our minds. So that's just one very simple way. I heard that in meditation, when you're restless, just think about Guruji. Imagine Guruji being there next to you, and that presence actually does the work for us. So yeah, it's a slightly easier answer than trying to have a philosophical discussion with an atheist.
Can you, Chris? We're not obviously immune to sexual desires and all these kind of stuff. Even every yogi should be very vigilant because we can fall prey to it just as easily as the next man. So, but if you are in the Maya, M-I-R-E, then would you still be able to picture Guruji if you're in that state where, like, you haven't got control, but you want to? Would you sully your good image of like purity, which is God and gurus, to at that position?
I would say yes, because admittedly I've been there at times, and what scared me actually about the last part of this chapter that we read, I actually related to Kumar. I actually could relate to that character, where we all have that danger, going too close to a tide that could pull us away, or we go too close to environments that take our attention away. And funny enough, I was placed to lead that particular chapter, and it really made me think, like, this is definitely speaking to me. It definitely spoke to me, that part of the chapter where we had somebody who was favorable with the guru and still could not muster the will or the desire to stick at it, even that person. So I thought, gosh, what chance would I have? And that was before I accepted Guruji as my guru, did, became a Kriya band, things like that. But definitely at times, what I found was very strong were some quotes actually from Guruji that said essentially, I'm not going to be able to quote it line for line, but word for word, forget your past entirely. You can create a new today. And that's the power that God gives us, no matter what your past. And we've lived many lifetimes. thank God we don't remember many of these lifetimes, because we're just too ready to beat ourselves up and to punish ourselves with guilt. Far too ready to do that. So Guruji, some of the quotes is simply taught me, do not hold on to the guilt that you might think is there to punish you, and you might think you're worthy of punishment. And some things like that, I think, really spoke to me. So if that actually helps others, then that would probably be my answer: is do not punish yourself, because that's not God doing that. That's your ego. You know, there's always room for starting afresh, and that's today. That's now. So if you're in the mire, you know, if you're stuck in that space, it's because, you know, the ego's doing that, not because God's putting you there yourself. So
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the Yoga Sutras, it says that shame is one of the 8 meannesses of the heart. And there's a story from Brother Anandamoy. He said he was having a counseling session, and this man rang up. He said he was a devotee, and he said, "I've done something terrible, and I can't even look at Master's picture anymore." And Brother Anandamoy said to him, he said, "No, now you need him more than ever." And then the phone got cut off. And so the point being, he didn't know what the man had done, and he didn't hear back from him. But he said he felt very bad. But when we're in that state, you know, Sri Yukteswar says to Guruji that whether on the highest, you know, peak of wisdom, or I'm paraphrasing, peak of wisdom, or lowest mental plane, that, you know, I'll be your friend. And so giving all, you know, good and bad traits to God, because God created Maya and we're not responsible for it, you know, for evil. It makes all the difference of what we do, but we're not responsible for it. I think another thing, is devotee or otherwise, if we look at people who we admire and look at their traits, so for example, if there's something talked about, you know, intimate relations, or I don't know, alcohol or fighting or anything else, and then we look at people who we really admire and who we think are successful, and then analyze their traits and what they say about those things, that can shed light often as well.
Yeah. Wow, I've had lots of gems the past 5 minutes. Thank you all. Speaking of gems, Priyank found something about the role of Satan in God's creation, which might help us to shed some more light.
Yeah, this whole topic of you know, women being the downfall of man, and from, you know, the Adam and Eve story that Lauren mentioned, is further elucidated in chapter 16 of the Autobiography of Yogi, Outwitting the Stars, and also in discourse 7 of the Second Coming of Christ, which also has a really nice footnote in it, which isn't in the Autobiography of Yogi. So let's read this out. The fall of man from his native state of defined consciousness under the influence of Satan is understood in yoga to be the descent of his life energy and awareness from the centers of heavenly perception in the upper portion of the cerebrospinal axis down to the base of the spine, hence whence the consciousness flows outward to the senses and body identification, mentioned in Discourse 6. The meaning of Satan falling like lightning from heaven in this microcosmic sense is explained in Discourse 41. The deeper spiritual meaning of the Bible has been woefully trivialized at the hands of non-understanding literalists. I once talked to a very orthodox Christian missionary, asking him how the serpent could influence Eve to take a bite of the apple. Well, he confidently asserted, in those days, serpents could talk.
Thank you for that, Frank. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Guruji.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Good conversation with an Orthodox Christian.
Yeah.
Scriptural allegory is baffling to the literal mind.
Yeah.
Yes. And we also have some more counsel from Sri Yukteswar about sex and, what we should do. And it's really clear and very, it doesn't leave any room for interpretation, which I find very useful. And there's lots of lessons in this next section. So basically, it says that, when they were in the hermitage, if someone, was telling a suggestive story, that Sri Yukteswar would just have an unresponsive silence. And when I read this again, I thought, oh, well, perhaps that's a lesson for us too, because, we're in this world and we're, surrounded, as particularly in the West, it's a very sort of sex orientated place. And, this could even be a nod for us of what to do, if we're in company and they start telling a story or, speaking about it, having that silence. And then he said, that Sri Yukteswar said, "Do not allow yourself to be thrashed by the provoking whip of a beautiful face."
Yeah, that's a very important lesson for us, isn't it? Especially in this. So it must be quite difficult for most of us in this age where advertising, only beautiful people, generally only beautiful people are on billboards and adverts and films and anything where we have to look, newspaper cover, magazine cover, whatever, even like in a corporate space, they do this, don't they? Like if you go to any big company website, well, you usually have really beautiful people working and doing their things. So you've got to be really careful, and even more so in this age, I suppose, not to be thrashed, as Param Guruji says. But this idea of being silent, unresponsively silent, if someone tells you a suggestive story, it's quite difficult. My workspace probably has a suggestive story once or twice or three times a day, if not a story, then a joke, because that's the kind of culture that my work site is in. It's very, very, you can imagine what it's like. There's lots of train maintenance people and, that banter environment. And I don't know, it's really difficult not to because obviously I wouldn't entertain it generally, would I, if I could choose my company in that space. But if you just look at your computer and look away, or just be really evasive or dismissive, then it's rude. And then you'll do yourself a disservice in the sense that people won't be able to connect with you in a way. They'll think, oh, that's weirdo Priyanka over there, he's prude, little they know, right? But so I must say I don't do this. I smile, but I don't take part. But I could go this way that Sri Yukteswar is going, which is unresponsive, be unresponsive, because smiling is a response, isn't it? But being unresponsive would be quite career limiting, actually, for me. I don't know how it is for you guys in your workplace or in other circles of life, but this is something that my whole career I've had to face, which I've done.
Yeah, I think it's if I'm around that, then if I smile, I'm not smiling at the joke. I'm trying to direct my intention to smiling at where that humor is coming from, or that they're trying to seek happiness through it. But also not engaging it. But I like the definition of beauty that's given in the Autobiography in the Astral Realm about being a spiritual state. And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to look presentable. There's vanity, which is not good, but in terms of trying to looking presentable, divine mother takes care of creation, it's beautiful. And I don't think there's anything, the point is that there's anything wrong with a beautiful, what we might perceive as a beautiful face, but it's that sense attachment that's whipping us, rather than that person. So it's not like, oh, stay away from people who you think are attractive. Yeah. So, and also with Sri Yukteswar, if you're in that state where just it's a blessing being in your presence because of your transparency to spirit, I think there might be more room for maneuvering in terms of silence.
There's at least one pious thing about podcasts. No matter what your level of physical attractability may be, on podcast doesn't matter, right? So at least we're not. I know people are, some of you viewers listen on YouTube, but I'm sure that's not because of our faces. It's just to be part of the conversation in the room, as it were, as opposed to seeing our beautiful faces. That you may or may not think so.
This unresponsive silence that Sri Yukteswar employed as a response, it's really curious to me, because here you have a master, true master, an avatar of wisdom, having this response. So he doesn't actually deem it, that he's not going to engage in any way that might be, oh, I need to change this person's mind, this way of thinking, he doesn't engage at all. And to me, coming from some, I'm recovering from some perspective that I feel some responsibility to help change those around me. And so if a visitor is then in his hermitage, to my mind, it's almost like, oh, that's an opportunity to really help transform this person. And one way of doing that is to describe, X, Y, Z, and to sort of explain. And that urge is, it's very, very strong, I think, to try to be a beneficial force, a benevolent force in the world and all of that. But here's Sri Yukteswar, he's not employing that at all. And he is a manifestation of wisdom. So that really teaches me a lesson, like, stop doing what I'm doing, maybe as much as what I may be doing it. So to Priyank's point, it is quite difficult to sit there and, I've certainly been involved in many circles like that in the past, and actually maybe very uncomfortable, because you either change your environment or your environment changes you. Really, here's Sri Yukteswar simply rejecting that, and that force was probably felt very strongly by the visitors, right? So hopefully they did go away, and actually that silence was stronger than any word Sri Yukteswar could have spoken.
And I think also, Chris, something that came to me when you were saying that, surely you'd want to help change their minds. And perhaps this is the difference between a visitor and a student. Because the chapter talks, we won't go there just yet, but it talks about, students who want to, escape from the mire of sex delusion. And maybe it comes from a place of intention, right? Perhaps he could see, actually, that person has no desire to overcome this, so I'm not even gonna try, right? I wondered if that played a part.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lauren. For me, someone who I've been around that I might, I don't know, you might use the term look up to, or find it a benefit to be in their presence, if generally they will not jump at you for something that you might, they won't try and outwardly, be like a evangelical about something. And if there's something that should be corrected, or that we might introspect on later, that silence can help us, that can help have quietness, so that we're not trying to immediately respond to be defensive, but that we can reflect ourselves. And then I also find if I'm in a situation, for example, where some of these jokes might be made, which I've taken myself largely out of that environment, but sometimes, because also people are, we're all souls, but on the path of trying to evolve in the human body. So not holding it against anyone, and not holding it against ourselves as well, like you were saying, Chris. But it helps. I feel sometimes you can see that they're reflecting on that, if there isn't this direct, call to action one way or another. And so I felt people doing that has helped me. And if I do that around other people, I feel then it looks like there's more space for them to consider what's actually being focused on.
You mean the silence, Kian?
Yeah, yeah, the silence. So for example, or just a smile or something like that. And then they might be maybe introspecting or considering, okay, well, why didn't they find that funny? They smiled at me and it was friendly, but why they're not engaging that? And I won't say anything, you know. So I've had that done to me, and so I feel it's a more I don't want to say like it's not antagonizing when we're trying to change people, but it's just giving them space to reflect, you know, like it's beneficial that we find ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I also liked what you said, Priyank, about, you know, smiling, because, you know, especially at work, you want to keep the harmony, right, in your workplace. And it doesn't mean you necessarily agree or find it funny, but actually that smile kind of keeps the peace, right? Doesn't create unnecessary conflict where they really didn't need to be any. But and then equally, you know, Kian, if you are in a situation where you feel like, actually I can just be silent with this person and they will understand the meaning of that, you know, it's really kind of understanding who we're with, isn't it, and gauging it.
Yeah, and I think it also depends who it's about. Like if it's about someone we don't know, that might be one thing. But if it's about someone you do know, someone's like me, we might be more outspoken about that as well. And I think we all have that inherent consciousness as well, because like if it's about if there's something demeaning about something that we know, generally, whoever we are, whatever types of joke we make, we're probably going to defend it. So I think that impulse is there in everyone.
Yeah. So Sri Yukteswar then, after he says about, you know, don't be thrashed by the whip of a beautiful face, you know, don't get tempted or thrown off guard by someone who's beautiful. He says, how can sense slaves enjoy the world? Its subtle flavors escape them while they grovel in primal mud. All nice discriminations are lost to the man of elemental lusts. That hits hard, doesn't it? Yeah.
And it's so wonderful for that to be directly said, you know, and you're reflecting, it's like, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel sometimes as well, there's like maybe in this time or something that we've grown up in, or depending on the society or part of the world, but like maybe in Italy or Greece or, you know, further east, there's more of a family focus. And so if you're interacting with kids, I mean, including like young adults, like who are in their 20s or even 30s, or just whoever, there's kind of like older generations around as well. So there's kind of more supervision and more examples, you know, for values. But if there's not that, then it can just be kind of like, you know, pretty hectic. And then in terms of quality of relationships, I find that what Sri Yukteswar says in that passage becomes pretty evident if we start looking at it in our relationships and how we like people you know, our family to be treated, etc., for example, and then everyone else.
This this line, all nice discriminations are lost to the man of elemental lusts. I was wondering what you feel these nice discriminations are. It's quite a ambiguous concept. Is he talking about like having a refined taste in terms of, not just in terms of palate, but like what your pastimes are, how you perceive the world, discriminations, what books you read, what art you're interested in, what music you're interested in, that kind of stuff. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Me, I think anything. I mean, it can be like a friendship. It can be, well, I'm celibate now, but thinking back to like when I was younger, just if there was a focus on, you know, friendship and honoring the person that you're with, then I feel there's a lot more quality had in that engagement. And if things like, for example, at a certain age, sometimes here, you know, there can be a lot of focus on alcohol. And one thing for me was like we had these big friendship groups and everybody having a great time. And then at a certain point, alcohol started being introduced, and then it just kind of degenerated into people wanting to like have alcohol together, and the friendship was kind of secondary. And so I never liked that environment, and so I always felt it was like, well, to actually be there and enjoy your time with company, and you know, it could be doing an outdoor activity or just talking or something like that. But the less gross the engagement, I think the more enjoyable it is, and the better we're able to honor other people, you know, especially with the gender as well, in terms of respect, because God is in everyone. And for me, I feel when we look at others like that, then we're able to, you know, intuit the, you know, the natural qualities of that individual and also of God in them.
You know, I'm looking for a quote that I remember hearing. I think it was in the Awake film itself, where there was a devotee who was there with Guruji in the days when Guruji was with us on this plane. But he was asking Guruji like, oh, you know, I come up here with all you, you know, the nice folks and the monks and at London headquarters, and after I go back into LA and you know, I carry on doing my activities. I think the person may have been an actor, but they were indulging, let's say, in the senses, and they were saying, you know, how can I mix the two worlds essentially? How can I, you know, come up here and be
have the best of both?
Yeah, and go back and do the things that I do. And he asked Guruji, you know, can I go and you know, have sex and smoke and drink? And Guruji was saying, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you can do that. And he was confused, but then, you know, essentially, how does that work? Guruji's response was that you can do all these things, but he can't promise that the desire to then practice the lessons and seek God will not fall away from us. And talking to somebody, literally, I think was it yesterday, day before, they were asking me, I was saying I don't actually even drink any caffeine drinks, let alone, you know, alcohol or the rest of it. And they said, you must have a vice. You know, what is your vice? And that was sort of the question. And I was sort of describing as to why I do this. It's not that I don't enjoy sort of coffee or whatever it might have been. It's more that you simply work towards fine-tuning your sense of perception and, you know, what it is you desire. And the number one desire that really we're trying to fine-tune is the desire for God, to know God. That's always what it's doing. So everything else is sort of pulling us away slowly and slowly and slowly. It's very subtle, and then it's all at once. And it's, you know, something akin to what we're talking about here, that yeah, all these things they're okay. They're not to be judged, but then actually what they're doing in reality is just pulling us away from actually wanting to know God and having a relationship with God.
Right, and I feel that we can really feel that in meditation, or just even in just general consciousness, you know, during the day. If what we've been exposing ourselves to, you know, Guruji said environment is stronger than willpower. So if we've been exposing ourselves to what we might term or think of as uplifting or empowering or strengthening, you know, engagements or activities, or what we put our attention on, then we can feel uplifted and more aware. And if it's very base, then our consciousness can follow that accordingly. Lauren, what do you think of this sentence?
Which all nice discriminations are lost.
Yeah, because
elemental lusts.
Yeah, and in the sense that we were talking about before, is that man here is not describing to like the male gender, but like man is in mano, as in just mankind.
Yeah, I feel he means man as in person. For me, it feels like he's saying, well, you know, if you are too much into the world, too much about the senses, you can't really enjoy the subtle flavor or the subtle energy and perceptions of God, right? Because your consciousness is here. And when you're more here in the earthly kind of sense plane, it's more difficult to discriminate those kind of soul qualities and that level of consciousness, right? And perception when we're down there. And the more lustful we are, whether that's sexually or just in the face of senses, taste, smell, sight, the more we are focusing on that, the less we can really know the beauty of life.
Right.
Chris, you're talking about that awake section. Awake. It was Herb Jeffries was the guy. Just looked it up, and it was smoke, drink, all that kind of stuff. Have sex promiscuously, and he said, Guruji said, you may continue. And then he said, are you telling me that I can do all those things and then still come back up here with you lovely people? And then he said, Guruji said, but I will not promise you that as you continue to study these teachings, that the desire to do these things will not fall away from you.
Yeah, it's such a great lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think this subtleness is one that people who don't practice yoga may struggle generally to define, because the subtlety of seeking God is probably one that we've developed through lots of many lifetimes of pain and suffering. And so, to Kane's point before, sometimes when I see people doing certain things, acting certain ways, I do smile to myself a little bit, because we are all on our journey, and we all have, there's 8 billion people on the planet. There's 8 billion different paths to God, and we're all on that path. But I wonder, guys, all nice discriminations, it's make me think, like, when you're a baby, everything's like, oh wow, beautiful, and you're a child, and look at the butterfly, look at the colors, look at it, everything.
That's a great point.
Beautiful. And then when you grow up, you're kind of developing these more elemental sort of lust things. Your baby, you're so pure, right? It's kind of like reset button gets hit. So
right.
We work to try to keep the childlike, discrimination of beauty all around us.
Yeah. Wow. What an insight. Yeah. In terms of what we're seeking as well, like, what do we want? So, brother Seven Under in at London, the monastic visit last year in London, he was saying about why he became a monk, and maybe this can go for inner renunciation, and not just outer renunciation. He was doing it for both, but he said, I wanted to be a Jedi. I wanted it all. And then someone in the audience shouted, like, yes, Star Wars. And but in terms of what we want in life, it's like that passage that you were just discussing with Herb Jeffries, that if we go after some of the things, we might get them. We might get some troubles later on from them. But if we want everything we could possibly want in terms of, I don't know, like abilities, state of consciousness, to be able to manifest what we need at will. And I don't mean in terms of a wasteful sense, but I mean in the sense that Guruji says about, command of willpower, etc., and just general success. Then if we spend all our time on those certain activities and we can test ourselves, that doesn't give us the strength to be able to do those things. So it's like a trade-off that I think we all compare as we go through life. It's like what do we want? What does this engagement bring in terms of results and state of consciousness? What does this engagement bring? And then gradually, because I think we all have that intuition. We all have the intuition sometimes in those feelings and that happiness, but then it can go away. And it's cultivating that to expand, which is what we want. Because take the people, in sport or with money or anything else like that they value it for its own sake, generally they're not particularly peaceful or happy. So it can't money can't be the solution to the world's problems, etc. Because there's plenty of it to go around.
Yeah, and it says in the autobiography that those really seeking to escape the Maya-induced sex delusion, they actually received very patient and understanding counsel from Sri Yukteswar. And I love that line because, it doesn't feel dry or devoid of any kind of love or understanding. It feels like Sri Yukteswar really understood how hard it was for those devotees, even those that really wanted to sort of let that go and escape from it. It's difficult, right? And he was very patient and understanding about it. He's not devoid of the empathy that people have to go through to get past it. But he gave very clear-cut counsel. But before we get to that, Priyank.
Yeah, it's such a sweet way to be handled in with your vices, isn't it? And the philosophy, like that we're going to discuss in the next few chapters. It's so convincing for you to like change essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's an example of what we should do with ourselves if we're introspecting as well. That we don't try and attack ourselves, for whatever tendencies we're trying to we may have or that we're trying to overcome, but to do it just with that balance and wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Kian, for that reminder. Yeah, it's all too easy to be very harsh with oneself, isn't it? But Sri Yukteswar really just lays it out as it is. He doesn't, berate anyone for their carnal instincts. He just says, actually, like, this is the truth of the matter. And he says, when we're hungry, that has a purpose, and so does sex. And sex, the purpose of sex is to propagate the species, to create children. And it's not, as he says, not for the kindling of insatiable longings. So there you go. And he's very strong. He says, look, destroy it now, because even when you go to the astral, if you don't destroy it now, it will follow you into the astral. And when the flesh is weak, the mind should be constantly resistant. If temptation assails you with cruel force, overcome it by impersonal analysis and indomitable will. Every natural passion can be mastered.
Yeah. So if this really talks about how you should approach like different people that may approach you about these kind of problems. Here for us, it's very clear. If the flesh is weak, the mind should be constantly resistant. So like we can't be in that category of just indulge this time. We can't, as devotees on this path, we can't indulge. We have to be constantly resistant, as it's described here. And then the next line is good as well, because that I think replies more to people that aren't necessarily of this path, but may listen to reason. Overcome it by impersonal analysis and indomitable will. So if you it's kind of alluding to what I was saying earlier about approaching someone on the level of like what the philosophical outlook is and what they want from life, etc. And then that brings in the impersonal analysis. And then once you've agreed to that, either yourself or the person you're speaking to, then you have to use that willpower. And that comes again back to the teachings, because our willpower is one of our strongest tools at our disposal, both in terms of energization and healing to things such as this as well.
Yeah, and I think this is very universal, the impersonal analysis and the indomitable will, and which naturally I think gives immense resistance to things that are bad, because if we're analyzing it and we're like, and respect, if someone tells us to do something just for the sake of it, generally we're not going to do it, or we're going to ask why, which is natural and healthy. And unless that person is particularly under trust for some reason, and I'm thinking of Guruji or saints who maybe if we tune in with and feel that, but still with our own selves and personalities, because well, why should I not do that thing? You know, what will it bring me? What's the nature of it? Why is it coming up? And it's something I'm having to overcome. And then what am I going to do about it? And that process of introspection and then executive action, and then we do that naturally, I think, to refine ourselves, is just how actively and acutely we put it into practice. And if we're paying attention to spiritual teachings, then I think that's amplified much more than usual.
Yes. Yeah. And Sri Yukteswar also says, conserve your powers. There's quite a lot in that line, you know, because, you know, that force is very powerful, right? And not only that, but there is power in the force itself. So conserve it, you know. And he says, be like the capacious ocean, absorbing quietly all the tributary rivers of the senses. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, I agree with you about the conserve your powers thing, because if you're indulging in, whether it's sex or, you know, sense of taste, you're essentially, your energy is staying at your lowest chakras, and hence you can't conserve your powers because they're just being depleted. So there's that. But the other section, next line here about the capacious ocean, absorbing quietly all tributary rivers of the senses. This is Kriya. This is the Kriya process in a nutshell. And the benefit of Kriya in terms of mastering all these vices. Guruji constantly often describes disconnecting the sense telephones and withdrawing the energy from the senses back up the spine. So this is not, as I said, this is not just about lust or like taste. This is about like sense. This is about even if like material desires, like when you're hankering after material things or anything of this world, really, and also power and fame. All these things are kind of associated, but the whole process of Kriya, we're so blessed to have it, because everyone probably realizes, if you have a deep, you know, thinking about this, that these aren't the things that are going to give you happiness in the long run, but they've got virtually nothing that they can do about it. But the techniques and the Kriya process that we are all taking part in every day, not just helps us understand this philosophically, but actually gives us the tool to actually do it. And if I didn't have it, I mean, gosh, I don't know where I'd be. But it's quite difficult to see what your progress is. Like, how can you assess if your hankering for material desire has gone down? Like, you may think it's pretty low. Is it lower today than it was yesterday or last month? But you should be able to, if you look at a slightly longer term picture, like a yearly view, if you compare it, if you're like me, you've been on the path for over a decade, if you can compare it to over a decade ago, then you know you should really take you should be take a lot of comfort. Hopefully you've made a lot of improvement, and if you've practiced diligently and faithfully, then it's, you know, I can say with a lot of confidence that you probably will have made progress in all those areas.
Just to jump in on that, sorry, Kane. I don't know about you guys, but I seem to observe cycles in my life when it comes to desires and, you know, maybe even thoughts, habits that come back. They're not quite dead and gone yet. There's still, you know, nuggets of them left in my deep subconscious or somewhere in there. So one day I might think, oh, great, you know, I'm done with that. Or, you know, I haven't thought about that in a while, or I've changed these actions and haven't done X in this amount of time. and then a year later it's there again, or it's back, you know, even stronger or something like that, you know. And I think that's a personal experience from personal observation. That seems to be true. Like they just goes deep into the lake of our subconscious and then, you know, comes back. I think Guruji may have talked about that somewhere, but anyway, yeah, I think that's
He
sort of
does. In
he
God
has
talks,
talked about
God talks
Yeah.
to Arjuna. Seed thoughts. They're
Mm.
always waiting for
Yeah.
that fruition. So you've got to be really. We have to burn those seeds essentially through Kriya, and that's what it
Yeah.
does. Mm.
Yeah.
So if
He
you
also
take your-
says, don't test yourself.
yeah,
Don't, you know, if you think you've, I'm obviously paraphrasing this, and I'm sorry if I get things wrong, but he basically says, you know, if you say I think it's in a period of like 8 years or something. So say you think you've got over a particular habit, don't then test yourself to see if you have, because you might well be tempted again, right?
I want to
Because
say 7 years, but yeah, I think it's
okay,
something.
7 years.
Or 5
Yeah.
to 8. They said it somewhere else as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you might well be tempted, right?
Dangerous game.
It's a dangerous game.
Yeah. Well, fighters, they won't engage in sexual activity for like professionals for like 5 to 6 weeks before a fight.
Mm.
And I thought it was an interesting thing, because that's not necessarily come about through spiritual introspection and meditation, but it's just like a physical fact. But yeah, in terms of general senses and desires, I love how scientific, and I'm very appreciative of how scientific Guruji lays it out. So the reason we like sense stimulus is because just the energy is flowing out through the nervous system, and that's why there's no end. We might try, and then if we want to eat cake, we can eat lots of cake. Does it bring us happiness if we keep eating it? No. Then why are we doing it? And then look for something else. But a great proof is that with Kriya is very powerful. Even if we don't have a technique about putting the attention at spiritual eye, and Guruji says that's a swift pathway to the infinite. And so, that reverses the flow of the energy and is directing that within. And then we can test that ourselves and on a daily basis, if we're having all of these thoughts and desires and subconscious issues are coming up, if we try practice meditation, if we have Kriya, great. If we don't, then concentrating at the spiritual eye, and then be aware of what we're thinking about, or how satisfied are we, or how much we're able to concentrate on one thing. I think it definitely proves itself to you, and not that we should test it, as Lauren was saying, but that we can test the effects of internalizing techniques compared to just engaging the senses.
Just looking at the impact of indulging, and the impact is when we become sense slaves, we become subject to moodiness, depression, irritability. Cellular inhabitants suffer disability, ill health.
Sorry, what was that? Cellular what?
The cellular inhabitants suffer debility,
right,
ill health, and premature old age and death. So it's not a avenue that we want to walk down.
I'm sure we've all been there to some degree.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. And even Sri Yukteswar says, those yearnings, they sap your inner peace, right? And, you're basically wasting your energy on materialism. And he describes it as a desert soil. It's just, there's nothing there. It's such a waste, right?
So true.
Yeah. Even though it may not feel like it at the time, and one might get wrapped up in that intense sense longing, whatever that is for, it's ultimately doesn't lead to anything, and apart from more delusion. And then he says the forceful activating impulse of wrong desire is the greatest enemy to the happiness of man.
You know,
Yeah.
Restlessness is there seems like a definition of restlessness there. And you know how Guruji talks about how restlessness is the greatest evil because it inspires us to engagement, you know, improper engagement with the outer world. And if we, there's was it Man's Eternal Quest, Guruji talks about how the prison bars of habits are more confining than stone walls. And we can feel that, or at least I can, in life, if I'm being governed by habit and it's something that I want to change. And as you were saying, Lauren, earlier, it can take a lot if we, you know, we might make a bit of effort, you know, or effort on a single day, but we have to continue making that effort, as Guruji says, and develop it into, you know, dynamic volition, to overcome whatever we're, you know, whatever desire we're trying to, the good desire like meditation, or, you know, helping others, or bringing, you know, good work into the world, and also getting rid of bad habits as well.
Yeah. And Sri Yukteswar here, he gives us such an uplifting, strong kind of like affirmation here. He says, roam in the world as a lion of self-control. Don't let the frogs of sense weakness kick you around.
I love that.
I love it too, because you know, it is like that, you know, like even if you just like crave something to eat, right, and then you find yourself eating it, it's like, oh, you've just been kicked around by your desire, right? Like you didn't even, you know, and it's okay, you know, it's okay in the sense that we don't need to beat ourselves up about it, but yeah, use the discrimination, right?
No, it's not okay.
Well, no, it's not okay, you're right, but you know, we don't need
we don't have to beat ourselves up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we don't need to be mean to ourselves.
Yeah, but we also don't need to be beaten up as well.
Yeah. Although there is that famous sort of thing that people say, you know, give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
Right.
And sometimes I've found that in my own life, you know, if I say, oh yeah, but you know, I'll just have it this once, and then suddenly I crave it again tomorrow, and it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, and you know, you can easily run away with it.
Yeah.
So it's good, you know, I guess it depends on your temperament and what works for you. I quite like the strict, reined in approach because that helps me, but that doesn't work for everyone.
I like that discipline. I think it's something that we naturally look for in one sense or form or another, you know, in whatever activity that we're engaging with. One thing, time management as well. Like for me, that's something, you know, working on. You know, in school we have a certain structure every day, and then we might have, if we're doing a lot of sports or music or anything else, or hanging around with friends, you know, and then we have to determine how we want to spend our time, you know, if we're moving on after that. And you know, in universities there's more free time than afterwards, and work, depending on what we're doing. Some are more regular than others, but for me, I can notice all the difference. If I've got a day and I'm not planning exactly what to do, that day can very easily, a lot of it can go by. And Guruji says plan your time, and well, then when I do plan my time, it's like I have something to hold myself to. And you know, and it's like, well, I want to do these 10 or 20 things, and I'm interested in like another 10 or 20, and I want to do all of these, but then it's like, no, do this, you know, that's what you've laid out, and follow it through. So that's something I think daily, for willpower and getting things done, but also for introspection, I find useful, is that something to hold myself to account with, and then compare how well the day goes, you know, and if I've done a whole bunch of things on the list and it's been well executed, then great. But it's really easy to just while away time doing nothing.
Fun as well.
Well, the senses might like it.
Yeah, your soul is screaming, Priyank. No, don't do it.
Time.
Yeah.
Death is at thy door.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you're right, Kian. It's really helpful to really like schedule the day. I remember when I was self-employed and working from home.
Right.
And I had a lot to do. I was producing a show, so that
Cool.
my days had to be quite, I had to do things. So I literally scheduled my day by hour, right?
Nice.
And like from the minute I woke up to the minute I went to bed. And I really not only did I get things done and I was really productive, but I also made sure that I made space for the things that were really important, like
Right.
meditation.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, in this hour I am going to study my lesson, because it's whatever time it is, and that's lesson study time. Now you've had your hour of packing this bag and making your lunch and eating dinner, right? Now you're going to go and study your lesson. And it was so useful. And I find now that I don't necessarily have that structure, I don't often get to do the things that I would love to do that would
Right.
be really helpful, like setting aside a time to introspect. When I do it and it happens, it's great, right?
Yeah.
But then when I haven't scheduled it in, suddenly I'm it's time for bed, right? So
Yeah.
there's so much value, isn't there, in scheduling the day. Yeah. Anyway, we digress slightly, but very helpfully. Sri Yukteswar really helps us by the end, give us a very clear picture of the freedom that will be attained if we follow the counsel of what he has said. And he said that a true devotee is finally freed from all instinctive compulsions, and he transforms his need for human affection into aspiration for God alone, a love solitary because omnipresent. And there you have it, what we can have if we follow the words of the wise.
That last part, that love solitary becomes omnipresent. It's like, I think that's a great summary of what we've been talking about, in the sense of the difference between selfish or just ordinary love and divine love. And if it's just selfish or like constricted love, just to a few members of family, or some things that we might condone that we would like, it's very limited. But divine love in meditation, and there's that expanding awareness of bliss and connection to others, that's why, and it never leaves us. So, and what's greater than that? Omnipresent love.
Yeah. And this last line, it could be quite confusing, I think. What does that mean? I love solitary because omnipresent. I mean, I feel like we probably all have different interpretations of this. It might be quite nice to chat about it. For me, I feel like it's saying, when we love God alone, it's a solitary love. It's the only love we have, right? But in loving God alone, it's omnipresent because God is everywhere. And so in loving God, we love everything, right? And yeah. Kia, what do you think?
Well said. Yeah, just that, and that it's solitary because it's the only type of love that is omnipresent as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes, when we see saints, it's like, well, why does, or monks or nuns, and it's like, well, why would they do that? And there are different reasons, but in terms of the pure reason, and or it can just be within a renunciation, or it can be within a renunciation, but there's nothing lost if there's that increasing experience. So the only type of omnipresent love or detachment, this is another thing. This is actually something I was talking about with my family. I was trying to convey to them about detachment, and they would think it was a negative thing, but I was saying, but no, it's positive, because then you can love more freely. So yeah, I think you summarized it well, Lauren. And for me, it's that's the one type of love that is omnipresent, and that's why it's solitary.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly something for us to think about and sit with. And it does actually conclude this part of the chapter, but fear not, we have more of the chapter left. Much more. Don't go anywhere. Yeah, we have our next episode, which I'm really looking forward to. Priyank, could you run us through what we have to look forward to in the next one?
Sure. This next section is really about Sri Yukteswar's very familial relationship and human relationship with his mum, both in terms of how they are together, but also his duties as a son in the Hindu customs, because we talk about prescriptions for swamis versus when they're ordinary people, and also what Sri Yukteswar did in his cremation rituals for his mum, and what he wasn't supposed to do, for example, as being a member of the Swami order. And then this also talks about Sri Yukteswar's personality on all manner of subjects, which we'll get into in more detail again next week.
Lovely. Really looking forward to it. So on that note, thank you all so much for today's episode.
Thank you.
It was really great and very helpful, I feel, in so many ways. So thank you so much, and we'll meet again next week. And thank you to everyone who listened as well. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.